What is life? Why am I here? How is it all connected? And how am I going to navigate this beautiful but crazy journey? I'm Sylvia and welcome to the Soul Sunshine podcast. Today I'm talking to Kristina Freeman. Kristina is an acupuncturist and co-founder of the startup Grow Your Mind. She's a loving wife, a mother of 2 beautiful children, and overall an amazing woman. As a passionate acupuncturist, Kristina knew that there was a need that was not really being met. She saw more and more, especially young people who came through her clinic, who knew how to look after their physical bodies, but who were a bit lost when it came to looking after their minds and what they could do for their minds. So Kristina's background in Chinese medicine and health science gave her a great respect for the body and the mind connection, and something was missing, and Kristina wanted to create and offer that for her family, her patients, and for others around the world to slow down, be more present, and practice the ingredients that develop resilience. Kristina, welcome to the Soul Sunshine podcast. It's so awesome to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. It is absolutely delightful to be here with you and talking with you today.
Great, thank you. So Kristina, today we're going to be talking about mental health and well-being in children. So we're going to be talking about why it is so important to educate and teach our children really early on about talking about their feelings and about their emotions. We're going to be talking about how we can best do this and how our children can teach us a thing or two in return as well, how we as parents, teachers or carers need to look after ourselves as well. So Kristina, our story goes back a little while. We met in November 2018. I looked it up the other day. I was like, when was it exactly that we met?
A couple of years ago.
Yeah, we met in November 2018 and we were both part of a Kickstarter program that was running in Sydney. And I remember I was there representing digital storytellers and you were there for Grow Your Mind. And at the beginning of the workshop, we all went through the circle and everybody had to introduce themselves. And I remember you getting up and you talking about Grow Your Mind and the business and what you're doing there. And in my head, I was just like, I really need to talk to this woman. This sounds amazing and just so incredibly important as well. You know, talking to children from a very young age about mental health, well-being, teaching them about their feelings, their emotions, teach them how to build up resilience in their lives. You know, I just thought it was such a wonderful thing that you were doing there. So yeah, we ended up connecting over the work that you were doing there and have been in contact ever since and have had lots of beautiful conversations along the way.
And this being another of many.
Yeah.
Yes, that was an exciting time. I think Grow Your Mind had only been in operation for a year at that point. So it was very early stages and we were really lucky to get that opportunity with Kickstarter.
But the vision was there. It was all there.
Yes, the vision was there and it was helping us work out how we could have as big an impact as possible. So, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really looking forward to diving really deep into this topic with you today to learn everything there is about Grow Your Mind, to share it with all the people that are going to be listening to this. And yeah, to just learn a little bit more about how we can support our children and, you know, the younger generation to really set them on the right path so that they can grow up feeling really confident and strong in their own beings.
Sounds wonderful.
So, Kristina, to jump into today's conversation, tell me about how Grow Your Mind started. How did the idea come about, I guess, and why did you feel so passionate about this topic?
For me, this business, Grow Your Mind, is really quite personal. You mentioned in the introduction I'm a mother of 2, and at quite a young age, my eldest started to struggle emotionally, and I could see that there was a need to start teaching her about her brain, about her emotions, but more importantly, shine a light on those key qualities that build resilience, those positive preventative mental health strategies. And I was looking for something that was unintimidating, that was playful, that was really easy to start speaking with her about these things. I am also an acupuncturist, and I saw more adolescents coming into my clinic who really were struggling with anxiety and depression. And I think we are generally pretty good at teaching them about their physical body and how to look after their physical body. But when it comes to mental health, quite often, we don't quite know where to start. So I saw this need for parents to have some tools that were very engaging and easy to use in the everyday. So we teach our children to brush their teeth every day. What can we teach them to do for their mind every day? I was very lucky that my daughter befriended this gorgeous young boy at school, and he has the absolutely most delightful mother who is my co-founder, Alice Peel. And she is a primary school teacher with a master's in public health, and she's been explicitly teaching wellbeing in schools for over 10 years. So she'd really developed some very sticky, impactful, engaging, fun stories around how to teach some key topics when it comes to mental health and wellbeing education. And what Alice had found in the education sphere was every time she left a school, the wellbeing program would often fall down or, just wouldn't really happen in the same way. So she was passionate about creating something that any teacher could pick up. They could use every day in the classroom. It would be able to be used across units of learning. So you'd reference it in maths and English. It could be explicitly taught too, but also more importantly, created this sort of foundational language of well-being from which everyone felt connected and had an understanding of how they could navigate lots of tricky situations, life's ups and downs in a school and also in a home. So we really wanted to get together and create something that could cross that environment, both a home and school environment, and start sowing seeds to build resilient children. So that's kind of where we began.
I love that you've already said something really important there, right? It's the whole concept around we're teaching our children to brush their teeth every day, or we're teaching them how to look after their physical body. But what is it that we're teaching them about their mental health? And I think that's something that we've just never been taught as well. And I think just in our generation, that's something that's found more and more importance over the years, where you go wait a minute, it's not just about, how I feel physically. It's also at least as important how I feel mentally. And I do like the change, how that's coming in and how you're using that as, teaching the kids from a very young age so that they're growing up being well, there is no difference for me between physical health and mental health. They're both equally as important.
And they both actually affect each other. So,
Exactly.
There isn't that dualism around it. Good mental health will support good physical health, and good physical health will also support good mental health. So, they're part of a large picture of just health, really, health and vitality.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me a little bit more about Grow Your Mind. What is the program? How does it work? What are some of the tools that you're using within that program? Just give us a little bit more of an insight of what you're doing there.
Yeah, so Grow Your Mind as it stands right now, because it's a little bit different from how we first began, but Grow Your Mind, we're a certified B Corp. We're a mental health social venture, and we've created a whole school program of wellbeing that draws on positive psychology, social and emotional learning, public health, and neuroscience.
Before we go into that, can you clarify for people that are listening to that and who might not know what a B Corp is? What does that mean? You said you're a certified B Corp.
So a B Corp, it's essentially people that are using business for good. So our business is committed to contribute positively in both environmental and social ways. So not only do we work in a mental health sphere, but also everything that we produce has considerations around its impact socially and environmentally.
Perfect. Thank you.
So we have a whole school program that probably is the foundation of what we do. And from that, we also do quite a lot of teacher wellbeing and professional development. We found that supporting educators was really a key part of holistic wellbeing when it comes to actually teaching children the key skills. Educators need to have understanding of what mental health looks like for themselves to be able to foster that in their students. We also have physical resources for schools and homes, making wellbeing messages visible and beautiful and easy to actually refer to is really key. And particularly for homes, it's got more of a playful game-like focus. So we've created different games, objects, sensorial ways of experiencing, developing positive mental health habits and knowledge. So we work in homes as well, in that we've created resources for homes. We run free community webinars for families in the larger community. We are, as a B Corp, quite committed to create and have free content so that it can reach anyone, anywhere. And we have a podcast which is kids teaching kids key wellbeing topics, and that's been listened to in over 75 countries. We've just launched season 2. Yeah, so we have quite a broad range of ways that we teach mental health education. It is primarily focused on ages 3 to 12. People do ask us, when are you going to do stuff for high schools? And our children aren't there yet, but, we are both parents, both mothers, and we might see that content developing for that age-old group as our children get older, as that need comes for us. So that probably sums up what we do. It's for schools, it's for teachers, it's for families, grandparents as well are very involved in this. It's for the larger community. And we're really passionate about reclaiming that term mental health. Mental health often comes with a list of pathologies, or it comes with, the negative statistics. But actually, when you look at that term mental health, the focus on health, we all have it and we can all learn ways to look after it.
Yeah, definitely. I want to talk to you a little bit about that a bit later on. But first, when you're talking about, you've got a very broad range of products that you're offering for all sorts of different environments, like you said, from schools to, the home environment. Looking through your website, what really caught my attention as well is the brain animal characters that you've been developing to teach kids about their emotions and their feelings and how they're coming out. So I would really like you to use those as an example of the tools that you have and that you're working with in order to get that message across.
Yeah, so this was a story Alice has been kind of refining over the years. But what we found was when there's an understanding of the brain, then it gives more intention to why you're taught mindfulness techniques, what gratitude is doing in the brain, why we might draw on character strengths in a tricky situation, what growth mindset is all about, healthy friendships, how they impact our mental health. So we very intentionally begin with Grow Your Mind with the brain and understanding of the brain. And we do this, as you alluded to, through animal characters. So we've developed an animal analogy, and I'll share the story if you like. So we have 5 animal characters. The first one is your wise owl, your prefrontal cortex, which helps you make good decisions. It's all about higher order thinking, problem solving. Next up is the guard dog. It's your amygdala, and the guard dog keeps you safe at all costs. So if you sense danger, it will either help you fight, freeze, or flee. You've got your elephant, who tries to remember, the hippocampus. This is the memory part of your brain. So throughout the day, you're collecting a lot of different information, learning new things, and the elephant helps you recall this information when you need it. You have your sifting sooty, which is the reticular activating system. That's the focus part of your brain. So obviously throughout the day, there's lots of stimuli going on, and it helps you filter out what's not necessary and focus on what you need. And then finally, you've got the sensitive octopus, which is the insular cortex. Now, this part of the brain is all about empathy. So it really helps you actually develop an understanding of how someone might be feeling or be receptive to your environment. Now, everything's going fine when these animals are talking together and getting along nicely. You can make good decisions. You can be a kind friend. You can recall information. You can focus. But quite often what happens is our guard dog gets really big and bossy and perceives some of those little everyday stresses like busy traffic, like getting out in handball, like running late for school as a huge threat, and gets very loud and stops the ability for all of those animals to talk together properly. And that's when we overreact. We don't do kind things. It's very hard to focus. We can't remember things, and we don't make the best decisions. So when we have that understanding of the brain, what we find is, kids really early on can start noticing everyone else's bossy guard dogs. My kids quite often are saying, Mum, if you just took a few calm breaths, you might find the car keys and we can then leave. But when you have that understanding of how the brain can work, well, and that sometimes the guard dog is getting in the way, then you do actually learn the tools around how to calm that guard dog down, but also more importantly, how to strengthen up the other animals in the brain, how to strengthen up those areas and keep them all talking together. So, what acts of kindness do, what gratitude does. 21 days of gratitude can really help rewire that negativity bias that we have. The survival instinct that, so often has us searching for what's wrong rather than what's going right. Gratitude can have quite a massive impact on that. So when you actually teach kids that basic understanding of the brain, and from 3 years old, they really get it. They understand those animals and pretty quickly start understanding and remembering the brain names. Then it gives more meaning and purpose and understanding to all the other areas that we start teaching them.
That's amazing. And like you said, from a very young age, it helps them filter out going like, oh my God, this is my guide dog that's suddenly blown up and this making this big thing out of something that's quite small. But then on the other hand side, they also see it in you as well. So they start calling out people around them.
Yeah, that is the first step I found, is kids do notice it in others first. That self-reflection comes with a bit of practice. And you know, what we did early on, because it's not nice being told your guard dog's getting big and bossy, but we gave all our guard dogs names. So instead of it being your guard dog, it was, you know, Skipper seems a little bit upset. That water spilt on your drawing seems to have upset Skipper. You know, what might be a good way to calm Skipper down? So it does create a bit of distance, and it's humorous.
Yeah.
You know, we found that young and old, like adults, really relate to this, and it gives them a bit of permission to forgive themselves, a bit of self-compassion as well. Those moments where we do overreact, it happens. It's very normal. It's more about how we then learn from that and how we correct from that and how we also explain that to our kids. You know, I didn't sleep very well last night, so my guard dog's a little bit more on alert this morning, guys. Please, can we just try and have a smooth morning and get out of the house easily? You know, you can actually start having conversations about, you know, how you're feeling in a way that is really unintimidating and quite connecting.
And it's like you said, it's also really fun, right? Because rather than getting up and being like, oh, Mommy's really grumpy today, I'm not having a good day, you're kind of putting a little bit of a fun spin on it with those animals. And it's more fun for the kids as well to think about it in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Most of the time, not all of the time.
Yeah. So how long do you think it takes them to start forming that understanding of what that actually means?
I think it would depend on the child, and also it depends on how often they're talking and using that language. But, you know, pretty quickly we hear back from kindergartens, you know, little kindies coming home and talking to their parents about their guard dogs and having quite, you know, insightful conversations about, you know, basic neuroscience. So it really depends on how often, how much that vernacular becomes part of the everyday in that school or home environment. But once there is, you know, kids are like little sponges, and they're quite joyful, they're quite mindful. There's a lot of the skills that they naturally have to be resilient and to be mentally healthy. So once you give them that understanding of the brain, once you tell them what mindfulness is doing, what a few deep breaths, what looking into a pond and looking for fish, looking up at the clouds, what those things are doing to their brain, how going slow or listening out for different sounds, you know, when you start teaching them these things that they're naturally interested in at quite a young age, it starts becoming very normal habits for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And then they just don't have to think about it anymore. It just becomes their norm.
It does become, you know, normal habits, I think. Having said that, you will constantly, you know, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. You know, things will constantly change and nothing is going to be the solution for everything. One thing that we are big on is keeping mental health habits and keeping, you know, mental health strategy is really fresh. So there might be that something works for quite a while, but it's not always going to be the go-to for you. So exercise is really important to me, but there are times where exercise doesn't necessarily help me completely in the way that I need to. So it's having a toolkit of a range of strategies to help you and be able to draw on that in different times and know when something is really working for you and know when something isn't. But it's having that breadth of language around positive mental health strategies that's really important.
So what are some of those strategies that you are teaching as part of your program?
So yeah, there's quite a lot. One of the first things is emotional literacy. So we teach kids language, and this comes from the work of Dan Siegel, who is a psychiatrist and neuroscientist, and he talks about name it to tame it. So when we do have language around how we're feeling, it allows us to better be able to problem solve in those moments. You know, what we do know is if your amygdala, if your guard dog is big and bossy, but you can actually put language on what you're feeling, you already start waking up that wise owl, waking up that prefrontal cortex. It makes it easier to then problem solve and make a decision as to what to do. So emotional literacy is really quite key. Emotional regulation skills, and that mindfulness comes into that. But, you know, the breathe, stop, act, you know, how you can calm down in a moment. You know, a lot of different types of breathing. You know, gratitude, we talked about that before. You know, we have 2 hands and we teach kids from a young age. You can take 5 mindful breaths by tracing your fingers on one hand, and on the other hand, you can name 5 things that you're grateful for. And if that's all you're doing every day, they're really great strategies for positive mental health. What else do we do? Character strength is a big part of our program as well. And character strength is all about the fact that we naturally have different character strengths. They're different from abilities. It's things like respect, perseverance, zest, creativity. And there are some that we're more naturally able to use, and character strengths are something that we can grow. But it's not unique to anyone. We all have them and we can all develop them. And in different circumstances, we can draw on them and they can help us out. So we quite often use character strength education through stories, telling real life stories of people who've been through, setbacks and sadness and, challenge, and look at what character strengths they used. Again, also through fiction. So reading stories with your children and asking them, what character strengths do you think that character chose to get through this story? What were the things that really helped them out in these challenges? And when they start understanding that we all have character strengths and there's a range of them that we can draw on in different moments, you can start actually talking that way too. So again, one of the things I'm often talking about in the morning as we're trying to get out of the house, because mornings are quite busy and time constrained, is, what can I do right now to actually help us get out of the house? What does mum need to draw on? And quite often the kids are like, patience would be a good character strength right now.
Yeah.
So that's another area. We also teach growth mindset. So I'm not sure if you're aware of growth mindset. Carol Dweck is the researcher behind growth mindset. And what that is about is that the understanding that our abilities can be developed. So a fixed mindset is, I can't do it. Whereas a growth mindset is, I can't do that yet. And it is that with work, we can actually develop our abilities. And the extension from growth mindset, which is something we also teach, is benefit mindset. And it's that understanding of when we know that our abilities can be developed, we also know that we can become a contributing part of a society that is looking after not only our own well-being, but the well-being of others, and further extending into the well-being of the whole planet. So a benefit mindset is when you're serving the success not only for yourself, but for a whole world. So it's interesting. It sounds like a massive concept, but when you look at little kids, they have a very innate idea of what benefit mindset is. They do look out for each other. It is essentially acts of kindness and that ripple on effect. And what else do we touch on? We talk about healthy relationships, connection and, friendships really make up quite a key part of good mental health. What we know is that we are more connected in some ways than ever, but loneliness is also on the rise. There's a minister for loneliness in the UK, for example, which is both terrifying and reassuring, I guess. We also talk about exercise, exercise and the neurotransmitters that come from that really help protect from poor mental health is quite important. So there's quite a breadth of really research-based strategies that we teach kids about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super comprehensive. And I'm going to come back to that benefit mindset and that, how is what we do good, not just for us and for our friends, but also for the whole world. I'll definitely come back to that. But now I wanted to touch on something else. And it's like, everything that you're describing is pretty much exactly what we as adults should also be doing, right? It's something that you don't really have an age frame on that. It's something that will apply throughout your whole life, no matter if you're 3 or if you're 93. It almost feels that way. So, but why do you think parents, teachers, carers, and other people that are in touch with children are finding it so challenging and so hard to talk to them about mental health sometimes? Where do you think that's coming from?
Well, I think that there are a few obstacles when it comes to mental health education in a preventative way. So I think, firstly, we need to recognise the stigma that comes with that term. And there is a lot of fear around it. I think that is changing, but it's slowly changing. It's still, when we talk about mental health, there's a heaviness. For teachers, both teachers and parents actually, time is a massive pressure. We are often time poor. And I think that's partly where, with what Alice and I have created, we really wanted something that was easy to use, even if it was for a few minutes a day, because you can carve out small amounts of time. It doesn't take much time to actually start having these conversations.
And you don't need to do everything at once, right? That's, I think, the big thing as well.
No, and it is about starting small, having little conversations, modelling things. And I think, so time definitely is a massive obstacle. When it comes to educators, their own mental health, teachers have the same poor mental health. They're on par with nurses. They are required to be across so much. It's a very full curriculum for them. And if the last 12 months or anything to go by, they're on the front line. They're having to navigate with, the pandemic, with COVID. They had to navigate so much of that uncertainty. They were holding space to support our children. So really, that's partly why we developed the teacher wellbeing side of Grow Your Mind, because we really felt it was quite important for them to have an understanding and language around mental health and how to be mentally healthy for themselves. That was such an important part of the puzzle when it came to then fostering good mental health for their students. I think with parents, I think that, again, I mentioned time. I do think there's a fear of mental health. So definitely when we've done some market research, people didn't like that term. They didn't want to hear that term. So if you can't talk about it, then it doesn't exist. Whereas we have very deliberately and explicitly used that term because, as I mentioned earlier, we're wanting to reclaim it. Our mission is to make people feel more connected and confident in looking after their own mental health, but also in fostering positive mental health knowledge and habits for their children. So, yes, I think they are probably the biggest obstacles when it comes to why, these conversations possibly haven't started previous. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if you are not looking after your mental health and well-being yourself, you almost can't teach it to your kids, right? You have to do it for yourself first before you show your kids how to do it.
Well, it is also monkey see, monkey do. You can absolutely be teaching your kids about it, but how much they will actually be absorbing if they're not actually seeing it in practice.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, and it doesn't have to be really heavy. It can be as simple as I'm off for my walk this morning. It really makes me feel great to start my day that way. My kids know that. They know that I'm much, much calmer, nicer person after I've exercised. And we plan things as a family. What are the things that we love doing? We love connecting over a meal. We love watching a family film together. We love bushwalking. We actually talk very intentionally about the things that we plan as a family and what that's doing for us, why that makes us feel joyful and why that makes us feel connected. And so I definitely think we need to be putting our oxygen masks on first, as they talk about when you get on an aeroplane. We need to actually be looking after our own mental health first so that we can then nurture that in our children.
Yeah, I found that a really important message. And I think it's sometimes quite hard as a parent as well, because you're constantly giving and you're constantly trying to do the right thing for your children. And sometimes it's easy to forget about yourself a little bit and to forget about, what you need in order to stay healthy, both physically and mentally. So I really like that expression as well, putting your oxygen mask on first, because I think, otherwise you can't sustain it long term,
No, absolutely not. And I think also there is a risk too at the moment where we have turned parenting into a bit of a verb. So it's a bit of a job. And I think part of how we can reframe our mental health is see our children as less of a job and less of something that we have to look after, and see more what are the opportunities for connecting, for teaching that really make us feel good too. Actually looking after your mental health, one of my favorite things to do is to go snorkeling with my daughter. There are things that you can do that they enjoy that are good for you as well. And it possibly becomes easier as they get older. Obviously, when you've got a little baby that's very, very dependent, it can be a little bit one-sided. But I think looking for those moments of joy in the parenting, in the everyday, and joy is actually one of those key elements when it comes to good mental health that I think as adults often forget. So there's this beautiful researcher called Barbara Friedrichsen who has studied the impact of positive emotions on your mental health. And she talks about positive emotions like joy, awe, love, gratitude. It's like a lily opening up in the sun. When we're feeling uncomfortable, in those moments of uncomfortable feelings, we can be very shut down. We've got limited vision. But when we are experiencing these positive emotions, it really opens up our ability to see a range of solutions, to think much more broadly about life, to appreciate things. And, that's part of what I try and bring into my everyday, even if it's just a moment, even if it's a snap second, is a bit of joy or those positive emotions. And what's also beautiful, and I drew on this a lot in lockdown, was you don't actually have to be in the moment experiencing it. You can be remembering a moment that was full of awe or gratitude or love, and that actually still elicits the same response. So I had this extraordinary experience about 3 years ago that I draw on quite a lot, where I went swimming, and as I dove under the waves, I could hear whales and dolphins talking, and it was just so magic.
Amazing.
So I often try and think back to that day and that moment, and it really does. I literally can feel my chest kind of open, my breathing relax, my diaphragm drop. It actually has a physiological impact on my being. And more recently, actually, I was very lucky to go to Lord Howe Island and saw some extraordinary animals. I saw a massive bull ray. I swam with sharks, which was extraordinary. I saw an amazing octopus and a turtle. And so I often think back to these moments of absolute awe of the beauty of nature And it really, it's, as you can see, I'm smiling quite broadly now. It has quite an immediate impact.
It does. And it's like it goes both ways, right? That's what they say when you think back of something bad that happened. That's what they always say, don't dwell on the past, because just remembering that kind of gets you into that same state. But yeah, when you're looking at it from the positive side, which is way more beautiful, it's like, what are some of the memories that I just love remembering? What are some of the things that I've experienced in my past that just always bring me joy no matter where I am and what I'm doing, And I think that's really beautiful, that example that you've given.
And you actually hit on something there. There's a researcher called Rick Hansen who talks about how we're Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive. And we do tend to ruminate over the things that didn't work, get stuck in all the negative. And it is a conscious practice. It's like any kind of muscle. It's a conscious practice to actually pull ourselves out of that and try and flip it and think of, those positive things. And, little habits like, well, what's something you're grateful for today, or what was the highlight of today? You can't underestimate the impact of that. And I know a lot of families do bring in little rituals like that. And it is about keeping it fresh as well. So that kind of rewiring of that negativity bias and that focus that our brain often has, it's a muscle that can be worked.
Yeah, and it's when you're saying it's a muscle that can be worked, that's the thing with everything around mindfulness is a muscle, right? And everything around mental health and well-being is a muscle therefore as well. So if you start doing one thing and you continuously do it every day, it becomes easier and easier, and then you can implement something else, and bring something else into your practice. So you don't have to start it all at once. You just start with one thing.
Yeah, little things. Yeah. And I think authenticity is quite important. Like there is research around gratitude, and when it's not authentically practiced, it can actually be detrimental. So it is about keeping it achievable, keeping it fresh. We went through a stage where my kids were like, what's one thing I'm grateful for? And you could just hear in the tone of the voice was so inauthentic. And so we changed it. Like, what's something that made you laugh today? Who's someone you're grateful for, or, just keeping it fresh, or tell me a joke, making someone else laugh and the impact that has on you. I think keeping it fresh, never get stale with something. And if you are feeling like it's not working for you, try something else.
And keeping it fun as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. Humour is, my beautiful co-founder has taught me the power of humour. I mean, I always thought I was quite humorous, but she is next level humorous. That is definitely one of her super character strengths. And so there is a lot of humour in our work, in our life, and also in my family life. We draw on that a lot. Yeah.
Amazing. It's the most beautiful thing there is, though. I love it. So we've just talked a lot about how we can support our children in order to become more mindful and more resilient when it comes to mental health and well-being. There's also this really nice saying, which is, once a teacher, always a student. How do you think teaching our kids about mental health and well-being can teach us about it at the same time?
I think that, and we have touched on this a little bit, but in order to really have the impact that you want, if you want to build positive mental health with your children, is that you need to be practicing it yourself as a family, and you also have it mirrored back at you as well in some ways. Your kids will be the first people to call you out in really, simple ways. If you give them the language, I've heard so many times from parents around, Mum, you seem really stressed after that meeting. Why don't you do some finger breathing? Mum, how big is that problem? Let's put it in perspective. Kids actually coming back and supporting their parents to emotionally regulate, giving their parents language around how they're feeling. So, I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful opportunity for everyone to learn from each other. And, if we're really honest, sometimes when we're in the thick of a really stressful situation, it's very hard for ourselves to get out of that. And if we have children or partners or, a part of a family where you can actually be supported and have language that, they can use with you to help you out of it, then that's quite extraordinary. And I think, I know I'm constantly learning. I'm not a mental health practitioner. I'm an acupuncturist. I'm a passionate advocate around preventative positive mental health education. And I'm a parent, and I've learned so much from doing this with my kids, and they have taught me so much. And I think you don't get to a point where you've got it sorted. Mental health is something that you should never take for granted, that you're constantly looking after day in, day out. And if that being the case, then we're always a student, we're always learning.
I actually really like that because, like you just said, it is hard sometimes, even when we get into that space and into that state of, feeling overwhelmed or feeling grumpy about something or whatever it may be. It's sometimes really hard to get out of that and to find your way back. And so having your children telling you, Mom, something's going on, maybe you should do some breathing, I think is a really nice way as well, because it kind of makes you laugh at the same time, right? Because you go like, yeah, you are right, and it puts that perspective on it. Because when you are the mom or when you're the parent and you're talking to your kids, you're like, come on, just do some breathing. And they are like in their state and you're just talking them through it. And when you see it switching, it's a really nice thing. And it also shows support and kindness from their side towards you, because they're realizing that you're not well, but they want to help you out of it, So they're teaching you back what you've taught them in the first place.
Yeah, and it normalizes it. We're all going to experience life's ups and downs. And actually, the Dunedin study, it's a longitudinal study that's come out of New Zealand, tells us that if you don't experience a mental health issue in your lifetime, you're absolutely in the minority. So if we know that, then we should be building up a wonderful toolkit that can support us, a wonderful network around us that can support us. And, I think that that's what's so beautiful, if we have this belief and this mindset that we're constantly learning, that we're learning as much from our kids as they can learn from us. We're all human and we will all navigate these life's ups and downs together, and we can support each other. And I think when kids can support their parents in these ways, in really simple ways, it makes them feel like a contributing, meaningful part of family. So, obviously when there is really serious mental health issues, it's a bit of a different story. But as far as navigating the everyday stresses of life, it can actually be a really connecting, unifying part of family life.
Yeah, definitely. And also, when you were talking about the age groups that you're teaching, you're saying it's for kids from age 3 to 12 at the moment. Why do you think it's so incredibly important to start this conversation at such a young age?
Well, we know that 50% of adult mental health conditions have begun by the age of 14. So, and as I mentioned, the Dunedin study, we know that majority of people who experience at least one mental health issue in their life. So when we know these things, and this is public health, it's how we can look preventatively at these issues. So why don't we set our children up with the tools so that they are better able to navigate this? And that's why we really were quite passionate about starting this early. And what we found was with the stories, with the animal analogies, it actually was really sticky and had impact and landed at quite a young age. And when you have that foundation really early on, it sets an understanding and a tone to really develop quite a sophisticated language quite early on in life and build habits quite early on in life when you're still very much part of a family unit that can support it, when you're still very much part of a school environment where it's not so independent. In high school, we are moving away from our parents. We are developing a level of independence. We're very much in our peer groups. And if we have healthy friendships and know what healthy friendships are, then that's great at that age. But, early on, children are looking at the adults around them. So it's really quite a prime time to actually be fostering this knowledge.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, first of all, kids are really like sponges, right? They just soak up everything that you're telling them. And the other
terrifyingly so sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that comes to mind there is when you're looking at the Steiner education, for example, Rudolf Steiner, he says that up until kids are 7 years of age, everything that you do, everything that you say, the ways that you behave, that's how they think that the world works. That's how they think that's the right thing. And then only once they're 7 years old, they start questioning things and they start, going like, is this right? Or maybe forming their own opinions around things. So the earlier I think you can start that prevention and that education, the better, because when you teach them at such an early age, that's the way they grow up, knowing that that's the normal thing to do.
Yeah, it's foundational knowledge. And as I said, you look at little kids, they are actually in their own little world. They're naturally very joyful. They're actually often very kind. They're mindful. Absolutely. They don't have a sense of the appointments we've got to get to, the busyness of life. They do run at their own pace. And so capturing some of that, really harnessing the fact they're already in these states, I think can be quite powerful.
Mm. And so you've just mentioned it before, but on your website, there are some quite alarming statistics, I would say, around mental health that you're showing there. One of the things that is saying it's like, according to Beyond Blue, half of all serious mental health issues begin before a child reaches 14 years of age, which is really quite early on. How do you think teaching them and supporting them from a very young age can then influence their life later on in a positive way?
I think that if we know that, again, the Dunedin study, majority of people will experience a mental health issue. If we know all of those things, it's kind of like every home has a first aid kit for those times where they need it. So what does your kit for your mind look like? What tools can you have in there? What buffer do you have? If you know that there will be parts of your life that are going to be challenging, that you will come up against mental health challenges, how can you actually prepare for those moments so that you feel better equipped to be able to deal with them? And I guess our feeling is the more we have these preventative mental health skills, the more that we have actually really worked that muscle, that resilience muscle, hopefully the less severe and the less duration these mental health episodes will have. We don't know, but that's our thinking around what we're doing now, is we are actually looking to create a protective mechanism, a certain, not an armor so much, but skills that will help children as they grow older be able to navigate this with more ease, with more connection, with the ability to reach out and ask for the help that they need, with no stigma attached, with confidence that they know how to navigate this, even though it's going to be tricky.
Yeah, and I think what it reminds me of as well is like when I'm thinking back of even just challenges that I've been going through over the years, like you said, when you have that kit of mental health tools that you're using, you'll still find yourself in those situations. But if you practice that, you kind of get out of it faster and you know how to get out of it. And I think that's a very important thing. It's like, figuring out what works for you in which situations in order to get back onto a more stable playing field again.
Yeah, sometimes when you're talking to someone, it made me sort of think about sometimes when you become more aware of something, it can feel more vulnerable. But I think I've become far more aware of the nuance of my mental health, that it probably changes a lot more than I actually have recognized in the past, because I've become much more literate with my own mental health and my children's mental health. So it is something that I feel like I am constantly working with, but in a way where I'm not going to be blindsided by suddenly feeling overwhelmed. I generally am pretty aware of where I am and what I might need, unless, obviously things can change in a second, we know that. But on the day-to-day basis, I'm really checking in with myself and have a better barometer of my everyday stresses and of challenges. And yeah, I think that's kind of part of life. It's kind of part of the richness of life in some ways too.
Yeah, and if you never go through those phases, you're never going to be growing either, So those challenges, they're just showing you that you're growing as a person and you're developing as a person and you're kind of going to that next phase as well in your life.
Yeah, there's a beautiful saying called no mud, no lotus, from out of that ickiness. And quite often, those really uncomfortable periods of your life, there's something that beautiful comes from it. And,
exactly, yeah.
We often talk about that no mud, no lotus,
I love all your sayings. They're awesome. But it's so
I
true.
I can't remember if that was a yoga teacher of ours who told us that. Isn't that terrible? I'm trying to remember who it was that gave us that little nugget of gold. But yeah,
it's true though. I mean, not that you always have to have hardship in order to,
no,
have a positive experience. But, sometimes it does come with challenges and then you come out the other side.
Yeah, and challenges can be exciting, yeah.
Exactly. There can be opportunities, right?
Yes.
Reframe as opportunities.
We do often say to kids, is this a challenge? Is this an opportunity? Or is this a threat? When they're in the thick of something uncomfortable. And, if it's a threat, then that's a survival thing. They have to kind of work out what that is. Or, if it's a challenge or opportunity, Yeah.
So I guess in the next question, I wanted to come back to what you were saying before as well around the benefit mindset. If you do believe in the fact that we are all part of a bigger consciousness and we are all part of a bigger energy, how does the change of one person even, or in this case, lots of little children that are going to be growing up with a way better understanding of their mental well-being, how can it potentially change the way we even operate as a society? Because there's a new generation that's coming up and that's just so much more literate about mental health and well-being and how they're feeling and how they're acting in the world and how to deal with that. How can that change the way we operate as a society, you think?
Oh, it can be enormous. And we hear about this from a lot of our schools, the impact, of having language around mental health and how it impacts the whole class. And I think when we have an understanding of our own well-being and when we feel like we can support our own well-being, we will be more likely to think about others. But it also goes back, goes the other way, in that looking out for others and looking after others has a positive impact on our own mental health. So that sense of benefit mindset, and that kindness is contagious, and that we can be meaningful, purpose-driven parts of a society. Like, benefit mindset is all about finding and understanding that place there and how we are part of a larger body that contribute in a positive way to the well-being of the planet. That has not only a powerful impact on the people around us, but it's really has an incredible impact on our own mental health. And we do hear that when we start developing these mindsets in children, classes become far more connected, far more caring for each other, are able to troubleshoot and problem solve tricky situations, can really, in difficult scenarios, put themselves in someone else's shoes. There's less jealousy, there's more celebration. Successes are seen not necessarily as individuals, but as a group. So we actually hear anecdotally, and it's something we're starting to try and measure, that developing these skills, developing these social and emotional skills, these understanding of the brain, it can have a really incredible impact in understanding a far larger language of well-being, which extends beyond even humans. It extends to the environment. It extends to other living things. And, we hear stories about classes organising little charity drives and cake stalls, and, recognising how they can be of benefit. And, we've got an amazing environment group at the school that my kids go to, who are so switched on, so passionate advocates for the environment, have incredible confidence, and are already creating change in their community. And they're 9, 10-year-olds. Like, it's pretty amazing.
It's pretty impressive, isn't it? What they're capable of at such a young age.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you said something really interesting there as well, because you were talking about how in a classroom, how they are, for example, celebrating success. It's not necessarily an individual one, but it can also be a collective one. And that ties in really nicely with what you've said before around character traits as well. And it's that whole concept around what are my character traits, or generally my strengths, what are yours, which reminds me of this really beautiful children's book, All the Ways to Be Smart. I don't know if you know it, but it's just such a beautifully written book about all the different strengths that you can have, and it's about character strengths, but then also about physical strength and everything that falls into that. And I think that's another really important thing to teach kids from a very young age, because it's like, if you have your strength, that person has their strength. There doesn't need to be competition or anything. Everybody is good in their own ways. And then in a collaborative environment, you see how that all works together, and how that really all comes together at the end of the day. And that's something that can be celebrated.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can bring your strengths together. We actually talked about this the other night on a webinar that we had, and then on a family meeting that I had the next day with my kids. It was what our individual strengths are and how we can use them together to get more organised in our household, which has been slightly chaotic recently. But we looked at, where are our natural individual strengths? How do they work as a team? Mm. And so, you're building collaboration and cooperation together that way.
Mm. Yeah. And what I really love about that bigger consciousness as well is that if people do make the change, it just creates the ripple effect that is going out, and so it's even reaching the people that are not even in that space, but that's because the energy is kind of traveling further.
Yeah, I think if you think about things you can and can't control, you can't control other people, but you can control how you respond to other people. And that could be enough sometimes to change something.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's even just the behavior that you are showing them.
Yeah, absolutely. Your response to them.
Exactly. Yeah. So you were talking about how some of the kids in your children's school are the environment group, and how they are at such a young age, they're really passionate about it. Which brings me back to the podcast that you have mentioned before. So you've also started a podcast, the Grow Your Mind podcast, and in that podcast, it's kids teaching kids about their mental health and about how to be resilient. So tell me a little bit about how that's going and what the concept behind that is, because I really love that idea as well, children learning from other children what to do, and not necessarily only just from adults.
Yeah, so we really felt that there was a space for kids to hear from other kids and the impact that that would have when it came to keeping this education fresh. And we wanted to create something that could reach any child, any family, any classroom around the world. And so that's where the idea of the podcast came in. And so last year we launched the podcast, and we actually didn't anticipate that the pandemic was coming, but it was launched literally the week before shutdown occurred. And quite a game changer in that it's a lesson, it's curriculum aligned wellbeing lessons, but it's done in a way where it's really quite fun, playful kids sharing facts, interviewing other kids. There's always a story, and it can be a lesson that, as happened last year, happened in many a home at quite a challenging time when it came to mental health and, you know, the change of life as we'd known it. And we now have got season 2 that's just launched. And it's funny you talk about the Environment Club, because this week the episode is all about climate change and how you can actually create change, be involved, you know, what it means, but how we can actually start having a hopeful and positive impact when it comes to this challenge. And the kids are amazing. And the Environment Club at our kids' school were part of this episode in sharing some of the things that they're doing. So, yeah, it's been listened to in over 75 countries. It's extraordinary. It's had quite a huge reach. It was showcased last year on the ABC and Channel 7 as a really positive podcast when it has come to talking to kids about resilience and really helping them navigate what has been a really interesting last, 12 months. And this season's just really quite exciting. We've already had some really incredible episodes. There's been one on gender, which again, timing-wise, that episode dropped a couple of weeks ago. And given the conversation we're having right now, there are a lot of parents who are really concerned about the conversations we're having around gender and don't know how to begin talking to children at a young age. And, this episode is really it's a very easy and safe way to start talking about inequality and reframing what we think about gender and reframing our stereotypical ways that we have come to think about, boys and girls and gender. So it's a starting point for some of these conversations that can become a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more complicated later on.
So you're really talking a lot about all sorts of different topics that are important, but that are sometimes also a little bit uncomfortable to start the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first season was very curriculum aligned. There was episodes on brain awareness, on gratitude, on being of benefit, on, my memory, my hippocampus, my elephant's not working for me right now, on the key to resilience. This season, it's a bit more juicier topics, and it came from teachers talking about some of the problems they had in classes. So, for instance, the gender episode, one of the older teachers, Year 5 teacher, was saying, kids, they get to a certain age and then suddenly they stop hanging out with each other. I want to speak to this. Can we do something about that? So the second season has much more organically come from educators, teachers, even children asking, we'd love to talk more about these topics. So it's expanding on what mental health education is about, but it's still very much part of what it's about. When there's discrimination, when there's inequality, when there are challenges like climate change, these things can impact on our mental health. So whilst it might not seem like key wellbeing topics or mental health topics, they really do have an impact. And actually having an open dialogue around this, even from a young age, we know can be really positive.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Right. And like you said, those topics, they are all over the media at the moment again, so it's
and
not...
we did not plan that.
Yeah,
we couldn't
yeah, of
plan
course
that.
you can't. But I'm just saying they are all topics that are unfortunately still in the media and that are still being discussed and where we're still working towards a more equal future, I guess.
Yeah, there's a bit of a turning point at the moment. There is a lot of change and a lot of positive change, I'm hoping.
And I think the change comes in a lot of different areas in our life as well. I personally see it always as a bit of a transgenerational evolution because I feel like there's a lot of issues and a lot of topics that were kind of not being talked about, in our parents' generation, but in our generation, they have come more to the forefront and we are kind of pushing more into that. But if we are teaching our children about it, they will hopefully be the ones growing up. And for them, it's just normal, to talk about, like you said, mental health and well-being, to talk about gender issues, to talk about same-sex marriage, to talk about all those things that are out there now that we kind of had to fight for, or we're still trying to put it into the right kind of avenues for our children so that they hopefully can grow up. And for them, it's just going to be a bit more normalized.
Yeah, hopefully mental health is just something that we talk about when it comes to health. It's not something that's an issue. I think there will always be challenges, but I would love to see that term not being so kind of fear-laden. And, gender and gay marriage, again, those things, they're just part of the fabric of our life rather than something to debate.
Exactly, yeah. Hopefully we can make a pathway for our children that they grow up and they're like, why did you even talk about that? Like, isn't that just normal?
What was the issue?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what are some of the transformations that you have seen in children since they have been using your program? You've given us a few little examples already, but what are some of the more specifics around that?
So we have been gathering impact data since we started, and really simple measurements. So we're not about behaviour change. What we have been measuring is how confident children feel about looking after their mental health, the knowledge acquisition, so how much they know about their brain, if they feel connected at school, if they know someone that they could turn to, if they know emotional regulation techniques. And we've seen over 90% of children after doing Grow Your Mind have felt more confident, know key parts of their brain, understand what a benefit mindset is and feel that that's part of their everyday. They know ways to emotionally regulate, they feel connected. So it has had quite a significant impact in a positive way in the communities that we've been gathering data from. And similarly for teachers, after doing our teacher wellbeing training, it was 95% of teachers felt more confident to know how to look after their mental health. And also their confidence in fostering this knowledge in their students is also very high. It's again, I think it's around the 92% mark in the data that we've gathered. This year, though, really excitingly, we are doing an external evaluation of Grow Your Mind. So Wollongong University are actually going into several schools and externally evaluating it. So we'll see what comes from that.
Amazing.
Yeah,
That's
so
awesome.
it has been, for us, impact's been quite important to measure.
Yeah.
But I still love hearing when a parent shares something or a teacher shares something about a little anecdotal kind of moment. And I had a parent recently tell me about her eldest child talking her mother through the tantrum of her sibling, just sort of telling her mother what was going on, what might help. Those moments, those stories always just bring me such joy. And the mother was like, I didn't need to be a parent at all. Like, my daughter had this handled for her sister and I learned a huge amount in that moment. So
that's amazing.
I love that feedback. But yeah, it is having a great impact and we're just excited to keep refining the way we measure that too and extending it.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. I really love hearing that. I love that you're creating such an impact in the community and that people start teaching each other and that they're noticing it within each other. And that's just beautiful because that really, that creates huge impact at the end of the day.
Well, and we are impact driven. We wouldn't want our business to be running just to run. We have a purpose and that purpose is really important to us.
Yeah, and you do want to see the outcomes.
Yeah, definitely.
And so for anybody that's listening to this episode, how can parents get their hands on one of your kids or onto your program, or how can they get the program into their children's schools if they're interested? Talk us through how that works.
So there's our free resources. So online you can sign up for our free resources and the podcast anyone can listen to. To further extend the learning from the podcast, we have reflection journals that you can buy at a very inexpensive price. But for homes, we have several different kits. So our original home kit, which is the comprehensive offering of our games and objects that teach mental health education in a range of ways. That's the original and still my absolute favourite. And you can get that on our online store. For educators, again, we've got free resources there and the podcast, again, that can be listened to in a class. We're re-listening to it at home, actually. In every car trip, we're listening to a new episode and you can't listen to it enough. I'm getting something and so are the kids getting every time we listen to it. But for schools, we have an online digital subscription for teachers. So it's the comprehensive offering of the Grow Your Mind program. And there's some beautiful physical resources that you can supplement with that to have your wellbeing up in the classroom in a physical way. And if, individual teachers can use it, so you can subscribe as an individual teacher. But I think the best impact is when a school invests as a whole school. And if, there are parents who are wanting their school to look into that, we do have cases where the PNC's funded the program to be in the school or they've met, just get in touch with us via our website. We're very happy to facilitate some of that. There are resources on there that can talk you through how you do that as well. So I think in the family section is how do I get Grow Your Mind in my school? That talks you through how you can do that. And there's some information that you can take to your principal, to deputy principal or whoever's in charge of wellbeing at the school. But also please let us know, because we'd love to help you if that's something that interests you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. We'll put all the information into the podcast notes at the end anyway. I'll send it a little bit later so people can find you really easily. One more thing that I'm really interested to know from you is, what is it that you would like to see happening in this space that will support us all in raising resilient and emotionally strong children?
I think it's pretty simple, is let's try and get rid of the stigma when it comes to mental health and that term mental health. I still know people that feel very ashamed to be even talking about it and talking about it when they have an issue. So I think it's, getting rid of that stigma. That's what I would love to see. And that the conversations we have about mental health are far more about it in that preventative, positive way. Yeah.
So to end this episode, what do we think would be the 3 main pieces of wisdom that we would give to parents, teachers, children, carers along their journey of mental health?
Yeah, so 3 main bits of wisdom. I think for me, that preventative mental health can give you the opportunity to find joy and connection with your family. It doesn't have to be laborious. It can actually be a really wonderful addition to your family. So things like planning bushwalks, story time, and talking about the different character strengths in a story, mapping out positive mental health strategies is an opportunity for such joy, connection, and fun. I think another bit of advice would be, when you ask someone how they are, really be there and listen. We ask that question a lot, but to truly hear that and not want to either problem solve it or to just be there for that response, I think is really quite important. And model what looking after your mental health looks like. Talk about it. I'm going off to have dinner with my friends because my friendships make me feel good and these friends are really important to me. So investing time in them makes me feel good and makes them feel good, and we're there for each other. Actually explicitly share that stuff with your kids. So they're my little bits of wisdom, I'd say.
Great, thank you. Kristina, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been lots of fun. It's gone so quickly as well.
I know. I feel like I've learned so much. And yeah, I could keep talking to you, but I think we're running out of time. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. And yeah, hearing all your knowledge and your wisdom around this topic and how you're really trying to reach all the young kids out there, all the teachers, all the parents, the amazing work that you're doing in that space is just wonderful.
Well, thank you. I'm part of an amazing team. You're my co-founder, Alice. She is the content expert, and we've got a lot of other people around us that make this job really wonderful and lots of fun to be part of.
Amazing. Well, Kristina, you've mentioned a few books throughout our conversation and a few resources, so I will put all of this into the podcast notes. I will, of course, also put the Grow Your Mind website and the podcast and all the beautiful work that you're doing in the podcast notes, so that if people want to get more information about it, it's all there and they can find you really easily and quickly. I've found this conversation so interesting and important. I mean, I've got 2 young boys. One is 4.5, one is almost 2. For me, it comes at such an important time in my life as well to look into those things, go like, how can I talk to my children about it? How can I teach them those things from a very early age so that they just feel comfortable and confident that they can be vulnerable around me and that they can talk to me, that we can problem solve things together. I really hope that this conversation is inspiring our listeners as well to talk to their children and to really open the conversation in their home to talk about mental health and well-being and not be scared of it, but step into that space and really start teaching them from a very early age what to do, what not to do, how to deal with their emotions, how to deal with their feelings. And yeah, like we said at the beginning, also learn 1 or 2 things in return, from your children. Like Kristina said, make sure you fill up your cup before you look after anybody else. I think that's a really, really important message out of today's podcast as well. Make sure you are healthy and make sure you are well yourself before you do anything else. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Please do share this podcast with your friends, with your family, with anybody who you think might be interested in this topic and who might find value in this topic. I really hope this episode brought some sunshine to your soul. I'm sending lots of love and light your way, and until next time.